I tell you the two most unpleasant jobs in tech company, the two most unpleasant jobs, right? Number one is product manager. The other one is sales, because all day long you're having conversations that disappoint the person you're talking to. And as founder, you're doing both of those things. Being a founder is a profoundly unpleasant job. And Mark, as you said in the intro, right, it's also a really lonely one, right? It's a lonely one. It's a loneliness of being the salesperson. It's a loneliness of being the product manager, right? I don't know what the qualities of a successful entrepreneur are, but I bet one of them is like deep frustration tolerance, the ability to do unpleasant things for extended periods of time and to be okay with that.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. On today's episode of the Supra Insider podcast, we had Josh Herzig-Marx back on the show. He was a guest on episode 16, one of our favorite and most engaging conversations to date. Since that episode, Mark and I have gone back, re-listened to it, and one of the things that we really wanted to double click into with Josh is this idea that we touched on briefly in episode 16, which is around scaffolding founders. I've been thinking about that a lot in the kind of work that I'm doing right now, and Mark constantly works with product leaders and founders who are thinking about leveling up the product function at their company. So we wanted to have Josh back on to go deep in that area. And in this time, we did something a little different. We kicked off the conversation with a real life example with details abstracted out of a real instance of a founder who I know and want to help. And I wanted to pick Josh's brain on how to scaffold this founder to be better at product.
Yeah, it was definitely our longest episode, but it went by super quickly. We went deep on Josh's scaffolding framework, which has 3 parts: 1, soothing; 2, the insights; and then 3, the practice. We also talked about when founders should delegate, do the hard thing, and also when to play on your strengths versus get help. And if you choose to get help, when is it a good idea to go and hire someone full-time versus getting someone fractional? And then we concluded going deep into why we think that when you're an early stage founder, anything that's not go to market or product, it's a distraction. It was a fantastic conversation. Ben and I had a ton of fun, and we think you'll enjoy it too. Enjoy.
Josh, welcome back on the show. Mark and I have been itching to do part 2 since we published part 1. So thanks for coming back on.
I am super excited as well. I don't feel like you often get a second chance to have this kind of a conversation. And there are so many things we talked about last time, and I want to continue those, and I want to talk about all the things we didn't get to today. What are the two of you excited about talking about?
I think out of the last conversation, the thing that I've been itching the most to have a follow-on sequel conversation about is scaffolding founders and coming in, whether it's as a coach to a founder who is trying to get better at product, or as an advisor to a founder who's trying to figure out how to build and really set up their product muscle for success, or as the first full-time product hire, which both of us have been, and how to ultimately shape the founder, scaffold the founder, I think is the very intentional word to use the last time. So I just love to double click into that because I am experiencing a desire to level up in my ability to do that right now in a couple of the relationships I have with some early stage founders. So very actionable for me. Mark, what about you?
Yeah, I don't know if I have a lot more to add, but I think it's funny. A lot of times when I'm talking to potential Supra members, I tell them one of the reasons why I started Supra is because I used to report directly to a founder. I just felt like a very lonely role. And I feel like anyone who has had that role in the past, like their eyes light up and be like, yes, I know what it means. And I feel like my hope for this conversation, it can be a lot of a playbook of how to have a healthier dynamic relationship with founders. So yeah, that's why I'm excited.
Okay, well, Mark, I have terrible news for you. Being a first product hire, in fact, almost every role early enough at a startup is a very early role. And if I could just pitch Supra for 1 second, that is one of the things that I hear as being the most valuable part of being part of a cohort-based community like Supra, where you are explicitly matched up with people who are doing similar kinds of work in similar kinds of companies with similar kinds of experience behind you. I mean, it's because that work is so lonely. I spent, I like to say I did this, 4 times, not counting my own startup, and it was 4 really lonely experiences. So yeah, find your community, find your friends wherever you can, but also be prepared for that loneliness.
Love it. You're hired as Supra's full-time influencer.
Excellent. I'll take it.
Yeah. So the way I wanted to tee us up to get started, Josh, is I know a guy who's starting a company, He's raised a few $1 million after doing, let's say, a few dozen discovery calls. He's got a track record as someone who sold a company in the past. He built a non-product kind of company and grew it and sold it. So he's got a track record as a business leader, like a non-technical business leader, but he does not have experience leading engineering teams and leading product teams. And he's raised a few $1 million, and he has determined that he needs to hire a founding PM. So I chatted with him because we know each other, and I was trying to help him think through it. And he wants me to see if I know someone in my network to connect him with. And I would obviously not connect someone with this person if I thought the opportunity wasn't like a really good opportunity. So I asked some questions to help me understand if I think it's a good opportunity, any red flags. And it sounds like the role is him trying to delegate what I consider to be the hardest parts of starting this company to this founding PM. Figuring out the ICP, figuring out the exact problem that they're going to solve, making sure that the team, which is located in multiple countries, is executing towards that in the best possible way. He's pre-product, right?
Yeah.
So my pushback to him was, I think this is your job. And I think that trying to hire someone to do this is a mistake. And I actually don't think that the really good people are going to want this job for these reasons. And anyway, that's a kind of a spicy way to start this conversation, perhaps. And I'm not giving away who that is, obviously.
Sure.
But I would love to get your take on this from a perspective of assuming this person hires a 10 out of 10 hire. So let's say they happen to magically get this incredible founding PM to join the team. And that founding PM can come in and they have an opportunity to maybe help to scaffold this founder to be the kind of leader that we talked about in the last episode. How would you think about coaching that founding PM to even approach that?
I really want to dig in and learn more about why. I would honestly want to start by learning more about why the founder wanted to hire this PM in the beginning for a bunch of reasons, right? There's just curiosity, but also that's going to tell us what the real job description of that first product manager is going to be.
I can tell you.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so here we go. This founder does not have a background in CS or engineering.
Okay.
Needs an execution-oriented senior founding PM to take the vision and develop a crawl, walk, run roadmap, and then implement it with early customers. When I pushed on the need to have this kind of person, what I heard back is he wants someone because he doesn't thrive in methodological analytics of product research, doesn't enjoy detailed planning, writing specs, and user stories.
Yeah.
Doesn't have experience building and shipping software and its life cycle. So he's been searching for someone who complements him in those capacities and to get leverage out of them so that he can play to his strengths.
I'm not going to lie. It sounds like what he needs is a technical co-founder, a founding CTO, not a founding product manager, right? He's looking for somebody to do the kinds of work which I'm going to take a guess here that most of us who have been in early stage companies don't think is so important, right? The super early stage companies, writing detailed specs is not the thing you want to be spending your time doing. And on day one, you have no users to do detailed user and product analytics off of, right? On day one, you have a vision, and you want to refine that vision by having conversations with people. And whether we're talking about go-to-market or talking about product, I have a strong belief that that's work that the founder needs to be doing, right? I can't imagine a founder saying, I don't want to talk to customers.
He does want to talk to customers. I confirmed that. And it sounds like actually the path to him looking for this role is that initially he was searching for the perfect product-minded CTO. So I think he actually was looking for a CTO co-founder, struggled to find that perfect person, and then ultimately decided to unbundle that role into a founding engineer and founding PM role. So 2 different hires to help with 2 parts of the job.
Yeah. I'd go back and find that CTO. And if there's a decision that you asked me a very specific question and I'm telling you I don't want to answer it, right? The very best pushing I could give is to focus on that founding CTO, right? You want to find a CTO who's going to care as much about the product and the user and the business as they are going to be about coding. And that's going to be a hard role to fill. But you can't have a product manager make up for bits of that. Once you have that person in place, that person is going to start pushing the founder for, hey, what's the vision? Let's go build ourselves a prototype. Have we gotten a prototype in front of any users? Right? Should we do the prototype in code? Should we do the prototype? I don't know what the product is, right? Can the prototype be in code? Does it need to be in Figma? How are we going to do this? These are the kinds of questions that a good founding CTO is going to be pushing on. And at some point, it might be that the CEO says, the questions you're asking me are overwhelming. What I really need is a product chief of staff, someone I can talk at and who can take what I'm saying and organize that in a way that's going to be useful for you in this first moment. And it's going to be a poorly defined job. I would say that's the person to be hiring for. And then that CTO goes and finds a product manager with the right skill set. It could be, if this is a technical product, it could be somebody with a technical background who wants to be more business or customer facing. It could be a product manager with a skill set in this area. It might be somebody with, Ben, your level of experience, or Mark, your level of experience, somebody who's really very much a seasoned product manager who has been at that very early stage company and knows how it's supposed to feel and can provide the organization maybe more support and more judgment and more guidance as it grows. And that might be the right thing to do, but that product manager's got to report to somebody. And if the CEO is really so resistant to engaging in the work of building the product, then, which could be fine, then that person needs a CTO and the product manager should report to that CTO.
How do you respond to a founder who, in this case, done my best to, I told them, hey, look, there's the thing you want to hear and there's the thing that I think you should know, right? And these might not be the same thing. And I think the thing you want to hear is, I'll keep an ear out for great people and then I'll send those great people your way. That's the thing you want to hear. Sounds like an awesome opportunity, great vision, blah, 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 all this good stuff.
Yeah.
The thing I actually am feeling is that this is not a great opportunity for the people that I would think you'd be lucky to have for these reasons. And then there's a reluctance to accept that. Have you found success in changing the minds of founders?
No.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I mean, occasionally you can, right? I think the founders where I've had the most success in changing their mind have been the ones who have tried down a path and failed and who realized they failed and who want to try to do things differently. Like, you can't persuade someone to change their mind. You can only help someone who's already decided to change their mind, who has that level of openness. And if this is really the way they want to proceed, you know what? They can find folks who will say yes to that. But it's not going to be somebody who I necessarily think I'm able to help because it's not a model which I think works. And when I started doing coaching and advisory work, I went to talk to my wife, who is the smartest person I know, and who she herself was a coach for a hot second, and she didn't like it. And she said, the secret to being a successful coach is finding clients who don't really need you, which is a cutesy way of saying, like, for people who are going to go down a path and who are really committed to a path that you don't think is going to work, you can work with them, but you're going to ultimately be unsuccessful. Doesn't mean they will be unsuccessful, but it means you, who doesn't believe in the path they're taking, isn't going to be successful there. And I think that's probably true. I think more experienced product managers thinking about taking a job at a startup, maybe as that first product hire, should think about that as well. If they think that, right, just because the opportunity is good, if they think that the company is going down a path which they just can't get excited about, that might not be the right fit for them. Doesn't mean the path is wrong. Yeah.
Do you and your wife have a definition of what success as a coach means?
I think for her, she meant being able to be helpful to people. Right. And you can't be helpful to people who can't be helpful to people who need more services or support than you're able to offer. And you can't be helpful to people where the two of you disagree. Like fundamentally, I don't mean on small things, but fundamentally disagree on what needs to happen. I had a client. It was a great client, a lot of funding from a tier 1 VC, really cool product, great early customers, founder sold, like really happy reference customers. It was like all the pieces were like fitting into place for them. And for whatever reason, the founder and CEO decided he needed more revenue faster. He had revenue expectations for the company that exceeded those of his investors. And he decided the way to do that was to hire a CRO. And everybody told him he shouldn't. And the investors told him he shouldn't. His co-founder told him he shouldn't. Colleagues, advisors, I told him it was the wrong person at the wrong time and the wrong moment. And at the end of the day, it was his decision to make. And the hard thing for me is when he started to struggle with it. There were ways that could be helpful and ways that couldn't be helpful. Right? The ways that could be helpful is helping him to normalize the situation, helping him to get a broader perspective of what's really happening inside of the company. But I didn't have any great advice for him when he went looking to me for advice. It's like, how do I help this guy be successful? Fundamentally, I don't know, because I didn't think in the beginning he could be successful. And that feels really bad. Right? It feels really bad to be working with a client who you can't help be successful because you don't have a model for it, because you don't agree with some of the fundamental places where they started.
Yeah, it's so interesting that there's this parallels
between question, man.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Like, what are the parallels of finding a coaching client and deciding what founder to look for? In a way, it's like you're getting to the same essence of, is you think this person, one, has the potential to be great, and also do they have the potential to listen, right, and adapt to what people are telling them and to change. And I'm curious.
I want to put a different spin on this, right? I gave an example where it's pretty clear the founder was wrong, and that's fine. Founders aren't always wrong, right? There's a lot of companies generating a lot of value doing things the wrong way. But you hear the founders who come on to Lenny's and the way they decided to build their company was against the grain of what the smart people told them is the way they should build the company. That's awesome, right? I don't want to frame this as founders being right, founders being wrong. It's like, am I the right match? Is this a thing where I could be helpful? Yeah, it's about fit. And like, I'm a pretty good coach. I was a pretty mediocre founder once upon a time. And one of the reasons I was a mediocre founder was like, I don't know, there's all sorts of reasons I was a mediocre founder. But I did all the things I thought I was supposed to. Like, we worked really hard and it just didn't work out. And that has to be okay. And there are people who did all the wrong things and things worked out great. And that's fantastic. And I'm a bad judge of that. In fact, everybody's a bad judge of that. VCs are a bad judge of that, right? They're the ones who are investing in these companies which are falling apart. Like, everybody's bad at this. So I want to be really careful not to judge founders for not doing things the way I think that they should.
Yeah, I just listened to the Mike Maples episode on Lenny's, and he talks. He just wrote a book about pattern breakers and the things that all the successful founders do that are against the grain, and how 80% of the returns in his portfolio as an investor have come from founders that did pivot. So like, they didn't even work on the original thing that they were supposed to work on. And he ended up going through his years and years of history and coming up with the characteristics of what makes these founders. And one of those characteristics is a very like a disagreeable view on the world, in a way a lot of the founders have. And disagreeable, like, I love disagreeable people because they're really fun and interesting to talk to and to be around, and they're definitely not boring. However, I think being coachable while being disagreeable, or having a unique view on the world while still being coachable, is interesting, and it's rare. And he also talks about how sometimes people have completely ignored his advice. Like the Lyft founders, he gave them advice to not burn through all their money. And every time he gave them that advice, they just increased their burn rate and just burned through more money. And he's like, even though they ignored my advice, they did what they needed to do. And ultimately, you could argue it worked out, but at least they heard me. And I think the difference... Nobody really
knows how to do this thing. There'd be a lot more billionaires if we did, right?
But the thing that stuck out to me from that, going back to like, can you really like scaffold and shape founders, is he said it was never like he felt like the guys at Lyft in the moment were saying, I think that's a dumb idea. They weren't getting defensive. They weren't saying, I think that's bad advice. They were like listening, saying it's great advice. I totally see why it's coming from. They steel man the advice that they're getting. And then they think on it, and they come to their own independent decision of whether they want to follow that advice or not. And as an investor, and maybe as a coach and advisor and product leader, we should do the same, which is to ultimately realize it's their company. They're in the arena. It's their company. They're ultimately accountable to where it goes. And that's the thing that I always fall back to, is I like to be in partnership to these founders that I work with. It's not my job to tell them what to do. And actually, if they sway too much based on my advice, that's a red flag, because they're obviously not anchored enough to what they want to accomplish. They're not clear enough. I don't know if that's resonating for you, Josh, but like, I don't think they should blow too hard to where the wind takes them. I think they do have to have a certain level of like clarity and focus on where they go.
I think sometimes when we talk about advice, it's easy to think about, I don't know about the two of you, you probably have a lot of these conversations as well. I probably talked to 7 or 8 smart founders early in their journey, And the thing they always want is validation of their strategy. And the thing which I cannot provide is validation of their strategy. So if there's a kind of advice which you shouldn't be going to your advisors, your mentors, your coaches, your friends, you should not be getting validation of strategy, and definitely not your investors. Don't do that. And I think you out there, right, in the whatever we are, in the podcast-averse, who are listening to this thing, who are thinking, maybe I want, a coach or a mentor, right? Don't go looking to one to help validate your strategy or to tell you what your strategy should be. The places where we're helpful are much, much more narrow and much, much more tactical. Like, you're working on your strategy, and did you consider these aspects as well? Did you consider your go-to-market strategy alongside your product strategy? Have you thought about who your competitors are? Are you talking to enough users? Are you having valuable conversations with your users, right? Can I help you have more valuable conversations with prospects and users? Can I help you keep track of those things in a certain way? Can I help you structure your hiring? We talk about like org structure and those sorts of things, but like, what should we build? And what are the valuable features and who should we build it for? Like, I can't give you those answers, right? Those answers are literally the work of being the founder. And you out there in the podcast-averse who are listening to this thing are going to, not only will you do it better than me, you're the only person who can do it well enough for your company to be successful because you're the founder.
Last time we talked about why people want to delegate that.
Yeah, because it's deeply unpleasant. Can I tell you the two most unpleasant jobs in tech company, right?
Yeah, please.
The two most unpleasant jobs, right? Number one is product manager. The other one is sales. Because all day long, you're having conversations that disappoint the person you're talking to. And as founder, you're doing both of those things. Being a founder is a profoundly unpleasant job. And Mark, as you said in the intro, right, it's also a really lonely one, right? It's a lonely one. It's a loneliness of being a salesperson. It's a loneliness of being the product manager, right? I don't know what the qualities of a successful entrepreneur are, but I bet one of them is like deep frustration tolerance. The ability to do unpleasant things for extended periods of time and to be okay with that.
It's funny when you mentioned those two, because I think we're probably all of three heavily biased, but I actually really enjoy the product work. Like I could do that every day. The sales part, as a founder, that was probably the most uncomfortable thing I had to do and probably still have to do. And I'm curious, Josh, is that similar to what you see, and how does the background of people that you talk to like affect what people are comfortable or uncomfortable doing?
I think there's the larger like meta conversation that as a society, we are increasingly uncomfortable with discomfort. We have a million small ways to soothe ourselves throughout the day, including like, our stupid, can't see it. There it is. My stupid little phone, right? Where I can like self-soothe every single moment. Yeah, there you go. I can play with it. I can touch it.
Look how shiny
Flip
it is.
it over in your hand.
So nice.
So shiny. Oh, you got a baby picture in there.
Yeah,
Exactly.
Baby picture. It's great.
Right? Something unpleasant happens. You pop open your phone, you look at the lock screen, and there's a baby right there. Like, this is maybe another, and I'm the wrong person for this, but I'll help you find a speaker. Like, let's talk about, the emotional intelligence, the mindfulness, the brain strength, I don't know what the words are, to prepare yourself to be a founder and to do all those really unpleasant things. And if you can get rid of those things, why wouldn't you want to? Of course you'd want to, right? I've worked for founders who they did the sales in the beginning, but the moment they get it off their plates, the moment they felt they could justify it, raise a little bit of money, they went and they got it off their plates, and they never sold anything again, which is a shame because they lost touch with that part of the market. And they got a little bit further away from the market every single time they didn't hop on a sales call, or frankly, hopping on a sales call is fine. They didn't actually own that process and bring it to ground, right? There's some kind of insight you get about the market. And Mark, you're nodding because you're selling to people all the time, right? To go from a prospect to qualify them to be a real lead and to actually get yourself to a decision, a yes or a no at the very end. And there's a million little interactions you have throughout that process that tells you who your customers actually are and what it is they actually need. It's so important.
Yeah.
Mark, I don't know about you, but when I feel like the thing I'm selling is really valuable, I get super excited about doing sales. And in 0 to 1 work, getting the first customers to say yes to something is addictive as hell. Ringing the gong when you get the revenue in on something that you just launched from scratch. I remember we had champagne at the Canvas office when we got our first reservation after Ford acquired Breeze, and we spent 6 months rebuilding a whole business from scratch and got our first customer. And then I got to go and talk to all the people that are dropping off in my funnel, and I converted some of them in research calls. And you could argue it's like, I had a term, I don't know if I created this term, but in my head, I'd never heard it before, but I started calling it research-based sales or research-led sales, where I would get on research calls with people, and just by understanding their objections and explaining things to them better and addressing their concerns, they would then go and actually buy and convert.
Yeah.
And so I personally get a lot of satisfaction out of the dopamine of closing deals. Of course, I've also, when I was at Attentive, I tried to get a new initiative off the ground, talked to 60 prospects to try to get them to say yes to something. And we couldn't get a single yes because they all wanted a case study. And that was extremely frustrating, right? But I think that the learnings are, as long as I'm learning new things and not making the same mistake over and over again, that's great. I think if you're trying to sell something and you get no over and over again, and you're refining and pitching things differently and you're still getting no's, that can lead to burnout in my experience, because it feels like you have no idea. It's like you're losing touch with the gears on the ground. Like, what can you actually do differently?
Yeah.
I have like 3 interesting thoughts about this.
Please. Yeah.
Okay, but Mark, you go.
No, I mean, I usually find that when you get a lot of no's and you still don't know what's going on, I think that's maybe a sign that you missed something big or important.
Yeah.
And that almost like, it's related to you were saying to about Lenny's podcast that Mike was saying, hey, like actually the most successful founders are the ones that pivot. And I think you have to have that perception of like, hey, something has changed. Pick up on that and then try it again, right? If you don't iterate, if you don't do this, I think then that's where no matter what you do, you probably won't work out in the long term, because the environment changes all the time. But Josh,
right.
Go for it.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting, the overlaps between discovery work and sales. So first off, Ben, that was really good signal you got, right? That you at least couldn't find an audience, a market of people or companies with a need so great that they would take a chance on this thing without all the sales materials. And by the way, for those of us who've done sales, and I did a lot of sales in my own startup, and then I spent 3 years at Google doing sales and biz dev. So I've carried a bag, I've had a number, I've done a lot of it. It's not what I want to spend my life doing, but I did well at it. Like, just because somebody says, oh, I'll buy it if you have this one thing, that's code for I'm not going to buy it. Right? Collateral chasing, like they were doing, is the same as feature chasing. Serious customers who are ready to buy don't do that. That's not why they didn't buy it. They didn't buy it because probably you weren't selling a thing which was valuable to an audience who would find it valuable. Like, that's really good signal. The amazing thing about selling, as opposed to just doing discovery, is a person has skin in the game. And if you're a great product manager, if you've done a lot of user discovery, if you've practiced this, if you read the mom test, if you have been doing this for a couple of years, you know how to frame questions in a way. You know, if you've taken Teresa Torres's classes, you know how to frame questions and have conversations in a way that kind of get people to answer them for real. But if you want to find out if somebody actually is going to value this enough to buy it, selling it to them is the way to do it. Google, by the way, classic example, when they're building something which is going to get sold, the product manager does the first initial sales. For a long time, I was pretty cynical about it. I'm still a little bit cynical about it. I think in some ways, all it ever does is prove that it's sellable by a product manager, not necessarily that it's sellable at scale, but maybe that's just a challenge of moving from founder-led selling to scaled selling. And there are books about this, right? Peter Kasanji's book, Founding Sales, tells you exactly how to like walk through the process. It's worth a read if you're a B2B person. But that's the way you do discovery, is by actually asking somebody to pay for a thing. Because otherwise they're just blowing smoke. So those are 2 interesting thoughts. The third one is the one I don't think we talk about enough, which is there's 2 parts of product market fit. There's the product and there's the market itself, right? There's finding the ICP. The one superpower the founder has, and probably the product manager in a 0 to 1 product in a sufficiently empowered organization has this as well, is they can say no to bad customers. The moment you hand this off to a salesperson is the moment they have to hit a number, which means they're going to say yes to anybody who will say yes to them. They're going to close any deal they possibly can. The founder, and maybe this early stage product manager in a sufficiently empowered organization, right? The founder is the one who's able to say, you want to give me money, and that's great, and I need money, but I don't think you want this for the right reasons, and what you need doesn't align with my vision. And either I'm going to change my vision, which might be the right thing to do, right? Adjust it, tweak it a little bit, that's fine. Or I need to say no, because the worst thing I can do for the company right now is have you pay us a lot of money, turn into a bad customer, we'll never make you happy, and all of our attention will be on trying to keep you happy. And I think that kills a lot of really early stage B2B companies.
And by the way, I think that last part right there, I think you're talking from a very mature founder point of view, but I feel like I've made that mistake of saying yes to the wrong customer. And I feel like probably a lot of first time founders have made that mistake as well.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that's like also something that as the first founding PM, you can help with scaffolding, because I do think it's one of those things that in the beginning, when you're trying to find product market fit, you're fishing for yeses. Doesn't matter where it comes. You just want to have that like, hey, like I've been able to close someone, because that helps with the momentum. That helps with getting the entire team like excited. And sometimes that's better than just waiting longer, at least in your head or short term. So like, yeah.
And I think that's one of the three parts of scaffolding somebody is we can call it normalizing the situation. Hey, this is to be expected. People saying yes who you don't want to work with, right? I think of it as soothing, right? So if there's three parts of scaffolding, providing insights, helping with practice, supporting practice for change, and the third one is soothing, that's an important part of the scaffolding right there. So if this is an experienced founding product manager, experienced head of product coming in early who's like, yeah, I've been part of 3 or 4 B2B businesses. This is unpleasant, but doesn't mean you're doing things wrong. That's a really valuable thing that you can say to the CEO who's out there maybe selling for the first time. If you are an advisor to the company who's checking with the CEO every week, okay, let's go through your pipeline. How does it look? Oh, you had 6 people say yes, but you have weird feelings about that. That's great. Those weird feelings are a signal, right? Go with that. Don't sign them. That's a normal thing to do. It's totally fine. That's not a bad thing for an investor to do if the investors are really involved, or a board member to do, which sometimes happens at very early stage companies. And that's something which a coach or a mentor can do for you as well. Somebody who's meeting with you regularly and can recognize that frustration, recognize that discomfort, and help you feel a little bit better about it. And maybe of all the things that a paid coach or mentor does for a founder or a solo product manager or a first-time head of product or anybody like that, is just to help them feel a little bit better, right? Help to shave off some of the rough edges of these minute-to-minute unpleasant jobs.
One of the things you said is being comfortable saying no to the wrong customer, and implicit in that statement is that there is a notion of the wrong customer, right? And I think in my experience, it's actually rare that I've seen a team I've been on knowingly say yes to the wrong customer after we've established what the wrong customer is. But sometimes to discover what the wrong customer is, you have to just say yes to like everyone, right? Is there like a shortcut to finding out who the right and wrong customer are without actually just working with as many people who will say like yes based on your original thesis, and then firing your customers as they're wrong, and then preventing more of them coming in the door later?
I don't think there is. And firing your customers, your early customers, is really hard, because probably a lot of those early customers come from your friends, your family, your YC cohort mates, other portfolio companies of your investors, like you know where your first customers come from. So firing is tough. It's another unpleasant thing which you can get better at through practice. I don't think there's a shortcut to doing it. I don't think that signing bad customers necessarily means you're going to fail as a company. It just means you're going to be causing yourself some more challenge and some more headaches, and another thing to deal with down the road. The only people who I ever see not sign bad customers are the ones who are really attached to their product division, which can be awesome or can be dangerous, right? And again, I don't know where great product vision comes from, great company vision necessarily comes from. I know I can't judge it from the outside. I think most honest VCs say they can't judge it from the inside either. That's why they take a portfolio approach to all of these sorts of things. But at some point, you go from like discovery to actually selling the thing. And the Jeffrey Moore model, right, is that your early customers should be people who are buying not because of the product, but because of the vision. And they buy into the vision. The product grows to achieve the needs of that vision, which maybe gets tweaked a little bit in the process. And then those early customers become your cheerleaders and become the basis of your go-to-market strategy, right? That's the classic crossing the chasm. And I do see companies like that, where like they know exactly what it is they want to build. They have a real clear insight into the needs of a niche. It's a big enough market they can make money off of it. But at that point, you're not selling to like, director of marketing. You're not selling to a engineering manager, right? You're selling to the CEO. They connect with the CEO who like totally buys into that vision, and their customer becomes the one who's supportive of it. And I think those are great customers. And that's a really good strategy for building your company if it works out for you, if you're correct.
this is part of the reason why I think that early stage execution is so much more valuable than strategy, because I think you need to be willing to put a subpar product in the hands of those early customers so that they give you the feedback that is needed to pull the product in the direction that it needs to go in order to meet the vision. And if you don't have good execution chops in your startup, you will fail to incorporate that feedback into the product, and you're going to be stuck in a state of perpetually disappointing those early design partners and those early customers. And I think you only get so many bullets to spend with them, right, Josh? These people might they might sign up for your product in the beginning because they like the vision, but they're not going to give you feedback for 6 months with no meaningful improvements.
I mean, yeah, with no meaningful improvements, but that's a whole other skill, right? Which I think founders are uniquely able to do. And frankly, product managers are uniquely able to do as well, which is you can talk to them a lot and you can engage them closely. If you are really solving a pressing need of theirs, right? If you deeply understand who they are and what they need, then you get a lot of bullets. Like you get a lot of chances, right? You got to keep working at it. You got to keep doing things, but they don't want to see decks forever, to your point. They want you to be actually solving things. It can be manual processes, it could be a spreadsheet powered product, it could be almost anything, but you get a lot of forgiveness if you're solving a problem. And by the way, if you're not getting a lot of forgiveness or a lot of pull like that, you probably haven't yet found a real problem, at least for the folks you're talking to.
So if I'm a founder and I want to get better at that, I'm going to hire a PM.
That's sure, go ahead and hire a PM. Go ahead and hire a PM. The ideal PM for your friend, let's go back to this question, right? The ideal PM for your friend is somebody who has both been an early stage product manager and knows what that work is like, but wants to be or think of themselves as being an owner as well. And maybe you can give them enough equity that they're really a founder, right? Maybe they are early enough in their career that the adventure is going to be enough for them, but you need to find somebody who thinks of themselves being a founder as much as you do and who cares and who feels as deeply about it. Because if you as the founder don't want to deeply engage with this work, then you got to find another founder, right? Or somebody who thinks of
Mark's
themselves.
smiling. Mark, I'm dying to know what you're thinking.
Yeah, I'm just like thinking of like who would take that deal, right? Like who in their right head
same exact
would be
question.
like, because at that point is you're basically a founder, right? Like you're doing all the hard work, and you're playing such a key role in the future and the success of the company. And even best case scenario, you're a founding PM. Like, what would you get? Like 2% equity, right? Like
in this case, the founder I think is willing to go up to like the 20%, 25%. Oh, wow. I think he's arguing
25 is a real founder. Yeah,
it's a co-founder role. But even in that world, if you're willing to go be a co-founder, why would you go work on someone else's thing versus your own if it's not? I think the logic is the same, even though the order of magnitude of equity stake is higher.
And then you could even argue.
I'd probably do it. As somebody who likes companies at a really early stage, he doesn't feel like he's got any great ideas. Okay. Younger Josh, who didn't like going to bed at 8:30 at night, would have jumped at this. I think there are people like that. And there's lots of reasons why somebody might, right? Some reasons might be they've been at big companies, right? They've been at Stripe or Meta or Google or Apple or who knows where. Or maybe they've been in a big tech-enabled company, right? They're a director like JP Morgan or something. And they want to move into startups. Okay, it's worth sacrificing, right? Some equity to be able to do that. They don't know how, right? They want to move into startups. They don't know how startups work. They want to sit inside one for a while, and they're excited by that. Another person might be somebody earlier in their career, right? Not a Mark or Ben level experience, not a Josh level of experience, but they have 3 or 4 years under it. Or maybe they've been at like consulting companies, so they're used to doing unpleasant things for long periods of time and working without sleep, right? They've been at McKinsey, they just got their MBA, and for them, it's the opportunity to make that kind of a pivot. It's exciting. So there's lots of reasons why. And I know a lot of people who have those roles at early stage companies and really love them.
Yeah, I think the key here is
the return on investment doesn't tap out.
This person's looking for a very senior person. They're not looking for a fresh out of MBA or fresh out of McKinsey. Like this would need to be a person that has, I think, if I'm remembering right, at least 5 to 6 years of proper PM experience. The cash component is extremely low to offset that very high equity package. And the thing I keep coming back to, or at least what I was thinking when you were talking, Mark, is if I am not strapped for cash, because I would have to not be strapped for cash to take that job, and I've got 6 to 7 years of PM experience, I want to own a meaningful equity stake in a new company, and I want to bet on myself to make something happen. Why wouldn't I start my own thing? I just can't reconcile in my head why that person would go hop on someone else's vision without having a deep pre-existing relationship with them.
You've never worked at a company at that stage. Number one, you don't know how it works. I know a lot of people who just like, how does a startup work, right? They don't have a network where they could raise money. They couldn't do that part. Or number three is they don't feel like they have an idea worth investing in. And at 25% equity, that's not bad, right? I know a lot of people who do it for 2% equity.
Yeah. I mean, at that point, then the other question that I would ask too is like, how compatible are our skill sets, right? Like this person is not technical, right? We probably have a lot of overlapping skills as a PM and slash CEO. And then if we want to be set up for success, we probably also maybe want to have a co-founder who's a CTO or technical, right? And at that point, then you're also giving meaningful equity. It almost feels like you would join as a co-founder, someone who, you have a lot of overlap, and then you have a key missing piece. I don't know. But maybe now shifting gears a little bit, I wonder if like another interesting option for that person to consider is like a fractional person to help them scaffold and then maybe hire.
I asked.
Yeah.
Not open to it. I think this person feels very strongly that they need a full-time person, but the same way your head went to that, Mark, my head went to it as well, because I know we still need to keep pulling the layers back on what it means to scaffold, but I think it's worth exhausting the option of making the founder do this role with some fractional support systems if possible. Not to interrupt you, but I did ask.
I'm not. I want to hear the pitch for fractional work, but this is a role where I can imagine that being helpful, only because I know a number of founders who are nervous about doing product work in the beginning because they've never done it before. But once they start doing it, realizing it's not such a big deal. And that might be the case here. So someone to work alongside them for, fractional temp person to help them with the basic skills, the things which the three of us know, like aren't that big a deal. User discovery, not that hard, right? Some user story mapping, working with the engineers, not as complicated as you think it is, right? If your only experience was companies that are 15 years in with really weird Jira platforms and reporting tools and all sorts of a decade of cruft built up, don't worry about it. It's going to be much easier. But maybe somebody to work alongside them for the first couple of weeks or months is a great idea.
I think in this case, we talked about the skepticism around fractional, and I am skeptical about fractional and full-time in different scenarios. I think each of them have their role, but if we define fractional as everything that's not full-time, but it spans the whole spectrum of like advisory to part-time to project-based all the way up to like full-blown interim until they find the full-time person. Mm-hmm. This sticks out to me as a very good candidate for a project, because I think a project here could really help them take the initial discovery that has been done to raise the round and convert that into a specific plan for which problem they want to bite off tackling first, to go back to those users, do another round of user research, say, hey, based on everything we learned, here's the problem we've landed on. I just love to understand whether this problem is resonating with you. Could you tell me about the last time you felt this problem and like what you did to solve it? Take all those insights, chew on them together as a team, come up with what you think a first version could potentially look like, assuming there's a designer in the seat. Go back to those users again, do another round of validation conversations to get feedback on the solution, and then make the sale. Like, this is going to be ready in exactly 1 month. We're going to have 10 spots in our early access program. It's going to cost this much. If you sign by this date, you're going to get this price locked in for life, whereas all these people that join later are going to pay way more. Can I count you in? Right? And if they say yes, great, you locked in a customer. If they say no, be like, cool, like what would need to be true for you to say yes? I think you could probably scope like a 1 month project for that entire feedback loop, a solid 10, 15 users. And by the end of that, I think that the person that does that project could step away and they will be way further ahead than they were before that person came in, if they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
It does make sense. It feels a little bit like, honestly, like an incubator. The things you might expect a quality incubator to do for a startup, which is you have the person with the vision, you have a person with a problem, right? They're looking to solve. They've never done these things before. Thoughtbot, the big design build firm, they used to run, maybe they still run an incubator like this, where they spend 8 weeks with you and they do alongside you that initial discovery, building a prototype, testing the prototype, getting people signed up. the things you can do over a roughly 8-week period. And I think for a lot of founders, that's really great.
So the flip side of this, right? If I were to make the counterpoint to why this is a good idea, it's when you have someone who is fractional, there is often a sense that they do not have skin in the game.
Yep.
And that they are not going to hold themselves accountable to the same outcomes over time that you care about as a founder. So in other words, this person's going to come in, they're going to make a splash, and they're going to leave. And then I'm going to have to clean it up, or I'm going to have to see it through. And the quality of their decision making is not going to be as rigorous as someone who is, hey, I'm going to make the splash, and then I'm going to have to clean up the mess myself.
Yeah.
If it's not good. So I think that's probably a thing I've heard too, is like that sense of wanting accountability.
I love the assumption that employees don't make messes.
Yes.
That
True.
like, if you only cared enough about outcomes, you wouldn't make messes. It's like, no, everything's always going to be a mess. That's a big part of my concern about fractional work. Is that one, is a person going to care enough? I think I have 3 concerns. That's one of them. The second and the larger concern is for the person who wants to be, right, you get like a 6-week contract or a 2-month contract, and you want to get that thing extended. This is the problem with working with a design build firm like Thoughtbot, right? Who are fantastic. I think very highly of them. There's a bunch of good design build firms, but ultimately they're trying to make the person who's hiring them happy, which isn't the same as trying to make them successful. Because over the scale of 6 weeks or 8 weeks or 2 months or even 6 months, you're not going to find success.
This is my problem with, not to get into your wife's territory, but traditional therapists. Is I remember asking my therapist at one point, if we're successful in therapy, does that mean I shouldn't be coming anymore? And the answer was, no, you should always be coming to therapy, right? So my view, and again, maybe I'm not saying I'm special, but I think my unique take is because I'm confident in my ability to drum up business, I do not get overly attached to expanding engagements. So if I come in and I think I can solve their problem in a month, I will do everything I possibly can to tap out even earlier. I'm going to try to get you there in 2 weeks, and then I can tap out and remove myself. But I do think that there's an incentive to prolong the engagement, expand the engagement, make the problem seem like it's intractable. Oh, we discovered more complexity. We need to keep spending time on it. Personally, that grosses me out to think about being the kind of person that does that. But if someone's not confident they can drum up more business and they get one, they hook one, and they feel like they don't want to let it go, I can see that certainly being the case.
And it takes a certain...
Sorry, go for it.
You go.
It's funny because as you were saying that, of like, Josh, you were saying, oh, like employees can also make messes. I feel like employees can also kind of prolong basically their tenure without doing anything, right? I feel like that's like the famous like executive who like spends the first 3 months in a listening tour, and then they do a reorg, and then they have to wait 6 months to execute, and then they do another reorg, and then it's been 2 years. They haven't really accomplished anything, but they're doing all these things that make it look like they're doing work that's helpful.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It almost feels like, again, it all goes back to fit and finding someone who's like really excited about solving that specific problem that you're dealing with, right? Like, Ben, it seems like what you enjoy the most is helping that founder find product market fit and getting them to launch their first product to market. But once that's done, you're like, hey, my work is done here.
I mean, sometimes it gets interesting at that point. And if it's interesting, and like, for example, one of my clients right now, like apparently the thing out of all the things I've done, the thing they think I'm like, this is my superpower, is just like user research, talking to users, aggregating insights. I got a whole like 20 calls scheduled, and over the course of 1 week, banged them all out, created a summary at the end of the week, and got like a tremendous amount of feedback on that. That seems like the kind of thing that even after I tap out, they're already telling me that they are most likely going to want to re-engage me for like specific research projects because they've hired the full-time person now, so that I could help with exactly that. Right now, that sounds fun to me, right? Like that sounds like a good fit between things I'm interested in doing and I'm good at and what they need and gaps they have. And so, yeah, there's the opportunity to continue to do things after I'm tapping out, as long as there's a continued fit. That's the beauty of fractional, is like people like you. What's interesting is you think about most terminations in a full-time environment where someone leaves a full-time job. It's that person's like dead for all concerned. Like they're just gone, right? There's no gray area between them either boomeranging back into a full-time role and them staying quote unquote dead to the company. I hate to use the extreme term, but like when I've left full-time roles, I felt like I never talk to those people anymore unless I explicitly reach out to them or they explicitly reach out to me in a one-on-one setting. But there's like a sense that like all the bridges have been cut. Even if it was a very graceful exit, like everyone's on good terms, they just keep going without you. And they just assume you don't want to tap back in again. In the fractional context, you could tap back, you could tap out, and they know that what you do is regularly tap in and out of different teams. So there's more of a, hey, like right now you don't need me, but maybe next month I can help out for a couple of weeks, and that's great for everyone. So I just like that. It feels more organic than I think the artificial constructs around full-time employment.
I want to touch back on something you said, your criticism, which I think is well-founded criticism of psychotherapy, right? Which is work that goes on forever. And I actually asked my wife about this in our car ride back from the Adirondacks as we were chatting about this and preparing for this episode. Like, I asked her this question, like, why does psychotherapy go on forever? And she reminded me of a saying that like insight is the second place prize, right? So if you remember, I said like there's three parts of it. There's a soothing part of it, of the advisory work, of scaffolding rather. There's a soothing part, there's the insight part, and there's the practice with the goal of change part. And she said, that's the reason why psychotherapy isn't quick, because there's very few people who can take an insight. Oh, I'm doing this thing wrong. I need to change the way I'm doing my user research. I'm too grumpy with my engineers. I talk too much in stand-up. Whatever the thing is, there's a lot from that insight, right, to actually helping the person make that change in the way they behave, in the way they think, in the way they feel, in the way they approach the world, in the way they do their work, all those sorts of things. And I think, first of all, I love your framing for a fractional product manager who can tap in and tap out. I thought it was interesting that in the beginning, your work was a lot of scaffolding of the founding team. Now they're looking for you to work on like tasks, on doing parts of product management. And it's interesting that you were able, in the time you did spend with this client, you did help to create enough change in the organization and the people who are there. They don't need that part. They don't seem to need that part of you as much anymore, which is great. Also, they hired somebody full time who can probably do some of that work as well. And I think that's the biggest difference that I find between the people who I have the short conversation with, right? An hour, 2 hours early on, I learned about their company. I learned about the struggle they're having, and I give them a bit of insight. And the people who actually are able to change, which just takes doing work over an extended period of time. And it can be helpful for lots of people to have a person sitting alongside them as they're doing that work. And it might be one question a founder wants to ask themselves as they're considering, do I hire somebody or I do fractional work? For the places where I think I need to work, where I think I need to change, am I going to need support for days or weeks or months or maybe longer? And if it's longer than weeks, that's probably a time to hire somebody. And if it's right a full-time salaried employee who you can expect to be there for a while. And if the kinds of change you need, you just need some insight here, which is oftentimes all somebody needs. In those cases, then yeah, somebody who's fractional could be perfect for that. Mark, you're nodding. What do you think? You talk to a lot of founders, a lot of people aspiring doing fractional stuff. You've been a founder. You are a founder.
You know, where my head was going was, how do I become that person that sees that insight and then is able to quickly change and adapt and learn as fast as possible? So I was just thinking of like, who are some people that are really good at that, and what are some things that I could be doing today as a person to get better at that? I don't think it's
reasonable to think you can train yourself to be better at that. That feels like an unreasonable. I think, being good at it is going to be something in the intersection of the kind of problem that it is, the kinds of support you have in the context of your life, and, something ineffable and hard to describe about who you are as a person. So people with small problems, right? I don't want to call anybody's problems small, but people with easier problems, right? Whatever that means, right? With lots of support in their lives, friends, family, pets, good sleep, good exercise, good food, all those sorts of things, maybe need less, right? People who are dealing with larger problems, right? Problems of what their personality might be, problems with I'm talking about therapy here, right? With larger illnesses, larger traumas, perhaps might have or who want to make larger changes for whatever that reason is. It might take longer. I think the same is probably true for people within business as well, right? I'm not a therapist, right? I work really hard not to be a therapist, but I think I'm a pretty good coach. And sometimes for some people, what they need is like just the insight. Buddy, it sounds like you're just shouting a lot at work. What would it take for you to shout less? He's like, oh, crap. I never noticed that. I do shout a lot at the office. Okay, I'm going to try to stop. And we check next week. He's like, yep, I stopped shouting at the office. I'm like, how do you know? He's like, well, I started asking people. I said, do you think they're telling you the truth? He's like, yeah, they're telling me the truth. I'm like, okay, great. You're done. Congratulations. All you needed was the insight. But mostly for most people who are facing larger challenges, one-time insight isn't enough. If they're doing fractional work, or better yet, if they're an employee, they can provide that support, right? For practice. I use the word practice because it implies we can get better as we do it over time, right? Support in the practice on a minute to minute or hour to hour and day-to-day basis because they're next to you all the time. If you're working with somebody like me who you're meeting with once a week, that's okay. It's more of like, I don't know, an accountability buddy where we decide an assignment for you to work on at the end of the session, and then you work on it throughout the week, and we review it at the next session, see how it's going, and inspect and adapt and change what the work is going to be. That's great. And sometimes all you need is that little bit of like insight. It's hard to know which one.
Yeah. Let's say I have an insight of like, hey, here's something that I need to be better at, or here's something that I need more practice in. Like, when do I choose to actually get the reps in and get better versus delegate, right? For example, like that founder that maybe they could be doing that UXR work and doing the research calls, but they realize, hey, actually Ben is a lot better than I am at doing it. And I'm going to hire him to do that for me. There's some very obvious things that you shouldn't delegate, but I think that's, as a founder, is a control struggle of like, when do I double down on my strengths versus when do I get the reps in for things that I'm not as good, but maybe I should be better at.
Yeah. My framing is that, and I think I often do this poorly, there are things that a founder has to be responsible for. And one of them is understanding their customer and their customer needs and how the customer is going to buy their product. How the founder gets there are a lot of different ways. I personally think the best way to get there is to talk to and eventually sell to your market. I think that's the most effective way. I think a lot of people agree with me. I'm not inventing anything new, right? There's books written about this, but that doesn't mean it's the only way. And as long as the founder is really making sure that within their own personal capabilities and within their own resources and within the resources of their organization, they're still taking responsibility for knowing those things, then that's great. With a founder who says, I'm going to go hire, who are the big consulting firms now? Who does these things?
Kinsey,
BCG.
Yeah, I'm going to go raise $3 million of a seed round and spend half of that on BCG doing a big market research push. That's probably a bad strategy, but I don't know. Maybe for the right founder and the right idea, it's a fine strategy.
Over a long enough time horizon, I'm sure some company will probably succeed with that plan, right? But like,
That's right.
I wouldn't bet my farm on that plan.
By the way, I know a lot more founders who came to the idea for their business, who came to the vision because they needed it badly. And they were embedded well enough inside of their market that they just understand who that buyer is because it was them.
Yeah.
And those founders can often get away with skipping some of the work of doing a lot of user research and doing a lot of sales research because they were the buyer of this thing, or they were the one feeling the pain, or both of those things simultaneously.
This was us at Abstract. Josh, our founder, was a designer and went through that whole problem of collaborating on sketch files with 20 other designers at Twitter. And there's like the hours of the day that I get to work in the file and the hours of the day that you get to work in the file, because there can only be one file in the Dropbox folder that we're all using. And they created this like GitHub model for collaborating on sketch files that became Abstract. And they didn't need to go out and validate the pain point in the beginning. He understood it inside and out, and actually attracted some really good talent that understood it too. So we did research later as we got thousands of customers and we're starting to improve the product to make sure we're building the right improvements and we're not messing up their workflows. And we did a lot of that. But the initial insight around the company and where the market was and what the problem was something that I think was felt very deeply by the founders.
My favorite example of this is Steve Jobs, right? Total asshole. Didn't do market or user research in the way that we think of it, but was such an unbelievably empathic person that he could just imagine what it would feel like to be a 25-year-old McKinsey consultant flying across the country on a Sunday night to their client site, and in their hand is this like shiny white plastic obelisk with wires connected up to it, and they're scrolling a little finger around and they pick just the right song they want because their job is hard and they're always on planes. And what would that feel like to be sitting there in like extended legroom on your JetBlue Nerdbird flight flying across? Like, what would that be? And he was like, he was an asshole, right? But so incredibly empathic that he was like, that's one of our users. I know what it's going to feel like. I know how to make it perfect for that guy, and do that for like another 100 possible users. That's another model too. And if we were all Steve Jobs, we could all do it that way.
I don't think we're all Steve Jobs. I also think it's a good thing that we're not all Steve Jobs. We only have so many seats on the planet for those kind of people, in my view, at least. But to go back to what you were saying, Josh, around the best way that you would recommend founders develop a feel for the market being to talk to the users and talk to the customers.
Yep.
I think it's so true. And what I would say is I think that where I'm landing on it, and again, my thinking on this is evolving over time as I'm doing every research project I do helps me evolve my thinking a little bit more on this. Where I'm landing is that even with a hyper engaged founder like the one I'm working with right now, who is watching the recordings of every single call that I'm doing to build that empathy. So he's not confident in his ability, or maybe he's not prioritizing running these calls. And as a reminder, you could really only do these calls during business hours. So you've got a bunch of other jobs that you have to do during business hours. And a lot of founders work at night and on weekends where they can't do user research calls. So there's an advantage in getting some leverage and throughout the working hours of the week to do these. So when he's watching these calls, he's getting a good secondhand sense of the content. He's hearing it from the source, but he's hearing it in the same way that you and I might listen to a podcast and enjoy it. But as we're all feeling right now in this conversation, being on a podcast and being in the conversation and having to listen and figure out what you're going to say next requires a level of presence in your mind that is completely absent when you're listening to a conversation, or even this exact conversation when we do the editing and we listen back to it. It's a completely different level of presence. And I think that where I'm going with all that is I do think there's no substitute to talking to the users, because the amount of presence that you need to have in that moment to really feel that person and to come up with the right words to respond to what we're saying. Like, you should feel the awkwardness of talking about their problem or talking about your solution. You should feel that. And that's where I don't know. I think that's just so hard to delegate, even with the best person in the world at translating those insights from the research to you. You're not going to feel that.
And I almost wonder if by that founder hiring you, you're making it less likely of them to ever do this themselves, because they're seeing like what great looks like. Then they go on themselves and try it. And the first 10 calls, they're going to be so bad. Like, I doubt they're going to be able to be fully present, because they're probably like so caught up into like, here's all the list of questions that I want to do, etc. So I'm like, maybe that goes back to the scaffold part of like Josh, of like practice out of like, how do we getting that founder to practice as fast as possible and almost being next to them and normalizing, right? The soothing of like, hey, like I was so bad when I was doing that in the beginning.
But what's more important than talking to customers? Going back to my premise of like, there's only so many hours in the work week. So maybe getting some leverage to have someone talk to your users is helpful. The premise is, I'm trying to think of like, what is more important than talking to your users before you have product market fit? Like in my head, I struggle to come up with anything that should lose that battle when it's competing for hours and attention during work hours. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't disagree. There's two things I say to founders about this, right? One of the things is you don't have to be great at it to get a ton of value. I think mostly what we do as grownups is things that we're good at, right? Most of us, everybody who's listening right now, right? Highly successful people who have gotten there by doing things day after day that they're good at doing, right? Playing to their strengths. And now as a founder, you're being asked to do something which you think you're going to do poorly at. And that's okay. So I think it's worth like just, I don't know, someplace out there reminding people like it's okay not to be great at it on day one. That's the first thing I say. The second thing I say is I would actually point them, Ben, to a clip of what you just said. Maybe we'll like cut that bit out when we do the little profile clips where you say, here's a thing you're still learning about user research and user discovery, even though you're really good at it. So there's no, I'm going to keep practicing and I'm going to be like done doing it. Like everybody's still learning, which means you shouldn't expect to like be, there is no like perfect and then you're done at this thing. All of us are improving at this. All of us are learning things from it. The third thing I'd say is that sometimes user research, product discovery early on is a tough sell to the founders. And that's why I fall back on founding sales, because that's one of the places where like you can do both things at once. And one of the reasons I push founders to be doing founder sales so much, however I can, that's a place I push, because if you're doing founder-led selling, then you're also having those discovery calls in a really concrete way. And that's a place I might coach people to make sure they're getting good value from it. But if you got to pick one or the other, I would do the selling bit.
You know, what's funny is you just helped me connect a dot. I sometimes talk to friends who tell me like, you know, our PM sucks. Like, how can I make my PM better? Like, how would you coach this PM? And it doesn't happen all the time, but when it has happened, I've asked, what is it about the PM? Like, first of all, let's assume they're a really good person. They mean well. They're smart. They're in the seat for a reason. You don't like this PM. I'm sure people have said this about me at some point, and other people, a lot of people I know talk shit about PMs. And he's like, well, I don't think that this PM understands what our users want. Like, I don't trust that they have a really good feel for the texture of how this thing's going to be received by the users. And earlier in my career, or at least throughout my career, when I have underwhelmed some of my colleagues or I haven't met their expectations, it's always been a flavor of, I don't think that you understand what the users want well enough. Okay, so this is feedback I have received. It's feedback I've heard from people about the PMs in their team. To tie this back to what we're talking about with the founders, if you're not confident in your ability to talk to your users, your team might not trust that what your users want.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
I think that because you are the PM of your product until you hire that person as a CEO, as a founder CEO. And I don't think it's a leap to make that connection, that your team is probably counting on you to really understand what your users want. And I think delegating that has implications from like a leadership perspective too, on how your team views you, right?
That's certainly for your friend, that's certainly what their investors are betting on, right? Raise a couple $1 million without even a prototype, right? Those investors are betting on their unique understanding of the market and a need, their unique market insight. And everybody who's going to join up until they start closing deals is also betting on that.
Yeah. And I think that person is confusing, or potentially that they're confusing the signal from those early discovery calls with the types of signals that they are about to encounter as they get punched in the face by the market. They do not have a clear problem that they're trying to solve. They don't have a clear ICP. They have a very zigzaggy path ahead. And I feel like checking off the box that I did all the discovery calls I need to do to raise this money, and now I'm going to hire someone else to do that.
Yep.
If you feel like you were successful because you did those calls, and why wouldn't you keep doing the thing that led to your confidence to raise that round?
Yeah, and I guess if you were that investor, what would be the signal that you would be looking for? Would it be like closed deals? Would it be like a proof of concept in the market? What would it be that thing that would be like not only they did that discovery, but I am confident that they also be able to execute on it?
I think at least a clear articulation of the problem, that, like, we talked to 40 people, 20 of them don't seem to have any problems that are relevant for us, but we found a group of 20 that all seem to have this really important problem that we think we're going to solve. So we validated the existence of a problem, and then we think there's a lot more of those people. That's one signal I would look for. You don't need to build any product to get that signal. But then I think also like understanding the ability to maybe get the deals done. Okay, going from that insight to the problem, we've also mapped out who the decision makers are in these companies, and we're confident we've got 10 signed design partner engagements from these people. they're willing to give us a bunch of feedback for 3 to 6 months in return for a year of free usage. And then after that, they'll pay us this amount of money once we can deliver it to them. Josh, what do you think? But those are a couple signals that I think would be de-risking things.
I know that we're supposed to separate go-to-market fit and product market fit. And the classic model is first find product market fit, then find go-to-market fit. But you know what? I think a lot of times it's backwards. I think that the one that you find first will have a lot more to do with the kind of company you're trying to build and the experience inclination of the founding team. This sounds like one where maybe some go-to-market fit, like finding an audience of people who value the thing you want to build, who you're able to reach, and who have a mechanism to pay for it, maybe is the most important thing at this particular stage. That's really good advice for like tech light products, for things that are like, oh, it's a database and a little bit of expert systems and a little bit of logic and a nice UI in front and some analytics, and you slap together a product. That's less good for like, deep tech sort of things.
Yeah, I think if execution risk is a real risk, like if there's like real technical risk or execution risk in your ability to deliver the solution, I would look for ways to mitigate that. But if it's
there sure isn't in this case, is there? Because there's no founding technologists inside of the company, right?
Well, however, everyone's building AI companies right now, right? And I'm not going to say too much to not divulge who it is, but there is a set of these companies who encounter extremely ambiguous problems and they're trying to solve them with AI, but they're not technical enough to understand the shortcomings of AI to solve some of these problems. And those of us who have been working with AI I've been working with it for the last like 8 or 9 months. It is unfortunately not as reliable as you would need it to be to do certain things. And if you can't appreciate that, I think you might say there's no technical risk here, right? This is straightforward. This is just an execution game at this point, right? Dangerous, very dangerous.
Yeah, very dangerous.
The
flip side is, given how many AI companies are solutions in search of problems, maybe a little bit of, honestly, this is why you build two halves of the company at once when you're a startup. This is why you have the go-to-market half and the product market fit half. That's why you do two things at once. That's why you have the technical co-founder. But there's an awful lot of companies with solutions in search of problems, and maybe a little bit of go-to-market testing would not be a terrible thing at this stage also. Like, do people actually care about this problem? You have no ICP. You have no value prop. Go figure these things out.
Yeah, this is why I try to avoid things that feel like double miracle bets. I think it's if you need one miracle, that's enough. But I think sometimes you see people, it's like, well, we're gonna have to figure this really freaking hard thing out, and then we're gonna have to figure this really hard thing out. We're gonna have to do them in parallel, but both of them will fail unless the other one happens. It's a Hail Mary before you even get started, and that's, again, it's dangerous. It's just really risky.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe like where I've seen the biggest difference between like first-time founders and like second or third-time founders. Those second-time founders focus on distribution a lot sooner. Like they're very comfortable selling those Figma mocks, or they first focus, hey, how are we going to get those customers before they even know what the product will be? And I think, again, if it's a technical product or there's a lot of technical risks, that might be a little bit different. But I think they bring in the distribution conversation a lot sooner than first-time founders.
Yeah, what I'll add is, in this case, it's not a first-time founder, but it's someone who's had success building a company that has not been a straight-up technology product software company, right? So there's a sense of confidence this person's coming into the game with that I think is potentially going to hurt them, because they might confuse their success with a completely different kind of business creation with the work that we all do. 0 to 1 startups require essentially product management. That's the job, right?
Yeah.
And thinking that you're going to hire, like, how do you even trust your intuition on what good is, right? Like, you've never worked with a PM before. Like, you've never been on a product development team before. So like, I think there's like some hubris in this idea that like, not only am I that I know I need a PM to do this job, but I also will know what good looks like with this PM, even though you've never seen it.
In a way, the only way to know it is to do it.
Yep.
Right. That's like why, like, again, back going to the sales part of it, like the best time to crack the distribution game is for the founder to start selling. And then once they figure out like that funnel, that pipeline, that sort of, go to sales motion, that's probably the best time to hire someone to help with the process. I wonder if that's the same thing here. Like even if you've been a PM, like maybe you have to learn it, and maybe that's where you get a coach or someone to help you and handhold you a little bit.
I actually think a PM in this particular case feels even more dangerous all of a sudden. Right? I talked about product managers as being it's unpleasant because they're always disappointing people. If this person really has a vision in their head for something which might be impossible today, or at least much, much more complicated, then all of a sudden you are 1 degree further away from the people who can't do it. Right? The PM isn't making your weird ass AI custom LLM, RAG training, whatever it is, thing work, right? You have some engineers inside of there. And the PM isn't going to be the one implementing it. You need to have that person who you have a deep enough relationship with, who you trust, who can tell you what you're imagining doesn't work, but let's go figure out the problem, the kernel inside of that we can build something awesome out of. If you don't have that trusted relationship with the person building your technology, no PM is going to fix it. And I worry they're focused too much on, I got this gut feeling, maybe I'm wrong, but they're focused too much on a PM disintermediating them from the messiness of actually building stuff. And they got to have that trusted relationship.
And the flexibility on the vision to some degree. Like if the product vision has to evolve, or the product vision, I say product vision in quote marks because oftentimes what I hear founders describe to me as their product vision is the story they sold to investors to raise the money. It lacks the texture. It lacks the realness that I, as a product person, I seek. And they're like, well, I want you to help me create that realness. I'm like, so you're trying to hire someone to literally flesh out your product vision, not to help you get there, but to like define it. And then when you start doing that definition work, you realize there's really no bridge from today to that thing they sold. So the job is to create that bridge. But the bridge is a zigzaggy path. It's not a linear path. And you don't know what the right answers are yet because you haven't done the work yet and you don't have feedback yet. So that's why I think it's so critical for the founder to do it.
I think it's so critical for the founder to do it. I'm going to push back slightly, which is not having your final product vision and company vision isn't a good reason to not start building it.
100% agreed.
Yeah. Okay. Woohoo! We're in agreement.
If anything,
which is really hard. By the way, this is a great moment, though. This is a great opportunity for a fractional product person, for a consultant, maybe an advisor, maybe somebody like me who's doing coaching or mentorship to come in, because you said something interesting that it's about execution, not about strategy. But there's the 2 to 5% of your time that should be spent on strategy is really important. If you're spending a quarter of your time or half your time on strategy stuff, you're doing the wrong work, but you got to get it written down in a way that you can improve it over time, in a way that you can communicate it clearly to everybody else in your organization. You can communicate it to your first customers who are buying it off your vision, right? Not buying it off how the product actually works. Communicate it to them and written down clear enough that you can refine it as it gets better. And I don't know, though, if I could point to like one challenge that the founders of all my clients have, it's really hard to articulate that vision and strategy in a clear enough way that you can improve it over time.
How important do you think it is to, like, if you had to pick between clarity over what we're doing for the next 3 months as a, let's say, pre-product market fit startup, kind of the stage we've been talking about, clarity over what we're doing for the next 3 months, or clarity on where we need to be in 2 years? Does one of those feel more important? Am I creating a false dichotomy? I think
you're creating a false dichotomy. I feel like 3 months is long enough to eat up your strategy as it exists. I think you need to have a vision. I don't know what 2 years means. That feels really stressful to me. But yeah, you need to have we're fully launched out there and doing the thing vision, which 2 years feels too far. 3 months seems too short. Maybe it's a year to 18 months, right? When you're done with the early version, you're like legit out there, legit launched. I think you need to have a clear vision for that and a clear strategy for getting there. And if that feels like it's taking up all of your time, you founders out there in the podcastiverse, right? If that thing feels like it's taking up all of your time or too much of your time, then raise your hand and get some help. Call on someone like Ben, call on someone like me, right? Call in any of the great fractional coaches, advisors, people you can get in there and get some help, because you got to get this thing done fast, because you got to put enough of a stake in it, they can start building your thing for your next 3 months.
Mark, do you have a cohort for founders that are trying to get better at product management?
No, but maybe I should.
I think it's not a bad idea.
Yeah, we definitely have people that are great product leaders that want to be founders. That is definitely a cohort that we'll probably create at some point. So yeah, maybe we'll add that to the Supra vision.
And the worst thing of all for them is all those founders, they are product leaders. You can't refuse to do the work. If you're the founder who says, I'm not going to do product stuff, that just defines how your company is going to work, because you are still the product leader.
Same with sales.
You are same sales. You're just a leaderless company, a leaderless product.
Man, all the activities that are not sales and not product in that early stage are, I don't want to say they're all a distraction, but I think you should do the minimum to get those things off your plate without getting in trouble legally, without running out of money. But all that other stuff, I really do think is, at the end of the day, boils down to a distraction, in my opinion, from the things that matter, which is getting customers and delivering the product that
So you got your product market fit and your go-to-market fit. You got to figure both those things out.
This is why YC's advice is so good, is just build something people want. Talk to users and build something people want is really what all of YC's advice boils down to.
Extreme
and it's so true.
Product market fit does solve almost all your problems, but you only get there by talking to users.
Yeah, and then
maybe you're lucky. Maybe you talked to them all in your previous life, but yeah.
Yeah, I would add probably hiring into the equation too, right? Like I think like you need to be able to bring in the right people to maybe do the things that are not product and sales. That's probably important. But
I feel like that's a thing. So the only fractional work I do, the only actual like hands-on keyboard work for the company that I actually do, and I love doing this, is the hiring bit. Maybe I'm like, maybe this is a little bit self-serving, but I think that's actually an easier thing to outsource than product or go-to-market.
Interesting.
I think ultimately you can't outsource the decision, but there's like, running a process and collecting resumes and reading the resumes and building your hiring plan and working through the hiring plan. You could outsource that because you're never going to hire in the same way again as you will. This is all disposable work.
Yeah, I guess in a way, like at that point, then hiring is just sales too, right? You're just selling someone to join your team and help you get there, basically.
Raise enough money and give away enough equity, and your sales process is a lot easier.
Not to prolong this point, but at the risk of opening a can of worms, isn't early stage hiring before you have done all the stuff we've been saying is important, like talking to customers, figuring out what you're going to put in their hands, validating the solution, getting things signed, right? Like, isn't hiring other people only a good idea if it's in direct service to those things until those things are in good shape? Because I think sometimes there's a temptation, I just raised this money, I'm going to build the team now. I get really excited telling people about this long-term vision. I just came off of a fundraise. I've got a perfect story down. I'm going to strike while the iron is hot. You bring people who are really talented into your team. You convince them to leave their jobs to come join your exciting new thing. And then they're not directly contributing to the success of it. There's not a real plan. You haven't actually thought through exactly how they plug in and how they can help you get where you need to go.
There's some highly tactical people you probably need to hire, right? You probably need to hire a BDR if you're selling this thing, because there's a lot of leverage you get off of a BDR, especially if you've already closed some deals. You shouldn't be raising your seed round until you've closed a couple of deals anyway. Some people raise it early, good for them. But you probably want to hire a BDR. If it's consumer product or something product-led, you might need like a media buyer or somebody to do that kind of work.
Good designer.
A good designer, perhaps, right? Whether it's fractional or full-time, it takes work to hire that person. Certainly, you need to go and you need to find your technical co-founder, and they'll need to make some hires, and you want to support them in that. So it's not zero. You still need a fractional person to do your finances and a fractional person to do your HR stuff. And it's still work to hire that person. But yeah, I fundamentally agree. You got the two focuses: product, go to market. That's got to be your two areas of focus for a long time.
Cool. Was there any other part of that framework that you came up with, Josh, around scaffolding or those kind of thoughts that you had that we didn't touch on?
I think we touched, right, the three big parts of scaffolding, right? There's a soothing. There's the insight, which is last week, the thing that the two of you talked about when you were interviewing people as possible coaches for yourself, is that flash of insight, which I think is really powerful. And then there is the hard work over time, which is the change. And the bad news for most of us is there's a lot of things we want to get better at professionally. So there's going to be potentially months or years worth of places where we want to be changing. Some things really tactically, right? I want my roadmaps to be more clear, right? And some things much more abstract, like, do I come across in the workplace the way I want to come across? Yeah, those are the three parts to it. And interestingly, whether you're an advisor or a coach or a fractional worker or a full-time employee, that's maybe the only thing that's scaffolding where all four of those different roles are all involved with that. Full-time employees do other things, fractional employees do other things, but everybody is involved, I think, with that scaffolding. Certainly for a founder or other exec who wants that help.
And the cool thing is that, I completely agree. There's always a ton of things that you could get better at. But at least I feel like after this conversation, if you're a founder, there's two very clear things that, if those areas of growth are not within the product or go to market, then probably they can be deprioritized. So I think that's an interesting rubbing it all together. Yeah.
I tell you what, I have one more spot in my roster for one more client. If anybody listening thinks they need some help with that, they should reach out, give me a call, shoot me an email, however you want to reach out to me. You should do that. We can have a conversation, and I'll tell you in that first conversation if I think, A, you're focusing on the right problems, and B, if these are things that I can help you with. And that's true if you're the founder. That's true if you're the founder and you have right? Maybe you hired that first product manager and it feels like it's not quite working out. You're not exactly sure why. You want them to have a little more support. It's true of that. It's true if you are that first time head of product in a company where you've never done this thing before, and you're also feeling a little bit unsure. In all those cases, you should feel comfortable reaching out. We could have that conversation.
Josh, I appreciate you so much for sitting down with us, having this conversation. I'm feeling like my cup is full with good energy after this, and I feel like I learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to going back.
That's just because the whole time you've been staring at the picture of your baby on your phone screen. I understand.
She's such a cute baby.
And also,
Mark has his dog. Mark has a puppy.
Yeah, no baby yet. I also feel like you should definitely send this podcast to your friend.
I think I did a good job of not divulging enough to figure out who it is.
I have not the foggiest clue, and I will not look through, but I'm happy to chat with your friend as well. And they can tell me I'm wrong, which will be totally fine. But if they're looking for more perspectives, I'm happy to share that as well.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. And
it was a pleasure. I'm going to be a little sad next week when Wednesday or Thursday rolls around and we're not talking on this.
I think we have to get part 3 on the books,
we should do it.
Mark and I always talked about how we need to have besties on the pod, and I think you're the first bestie. So we appreciate it.
I want to do the first panel discussion. Maybe somebody who's struggling with something. We bring 3 really different perspectives. Maybe bring a 4th person in here with more of a go-to-market perspective. We can talk through some problems. I don't know.
Interesting. I would very much like to triangulate thinking through those from multiple perspectives live. I suspect that's actually the exact kind of content I would find valuable, and that is missing, I think, from what I've seen online. I don't think I've found any podcasts that do that exactly.
Yeah. And we also haven't had anyone who does go to market too. So, and I think that's another kind of push on us too.
We have a really exciting marketing guest that is lined up for the end of July, who I used to work with, who runs the marketing function of a big VC fund. So I'm excited to have her on. Maybe, and she actually worked with me at a very early stage role, and she helps startups all the time. So I'm excited to get her on, and maybe after we have her on, we'll do a follow on and get you on, Josh. We'll talk through some meaty stuff with her too.
Maybe we can find a founding CTO person or a person who can talk through that work for how to find a founding CTO, what the person actually does, what that profile is, right? I talk big, right? In the beginning of like, they don't need a product manager, they need a founding CTO, but I don't know, let's bring somebody who knows what the hell they're talking about in for that conversation.
Yeah,
love it.
We need to pair with the Supra of engineering leaders and then get some of those people on here. I think that would be really interesting. Does that exist?
There's Plato, and then there's 7 CTOs. 7 CTOs, mainly just CTOs from big companies. Plato has a bunch of engineering managers, from engineering managers to VPs of engineering. But yeah, I'll find
Mark,
you someone.
That sounds a lot like a no. That sounds a lot more like there's an opportunity for this thing. Something super focused.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Design product leaders, that's another one. Yeah, there's a lot of potential synergies. For design. Yeah.
There's like 0 for design out there. Yeah, a lot of synergies.
Wow. Hell yeah. Thanks.
Hell yeah.
This is a wrap.
This is a pleasure.
Yeah.
Hope everybody has a great rest of your day. I had a lot of fun with this.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who you think would benefit from it as well. We really appreciate it. We'd also love a follow or a rating on Substack, Spotify, or YouTube. That's going to let other people find us. And if you have any topic recommendations for a future episode, please send myself or Mark a DM on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.